Hey everybody, welcome to the Sobriety Diaries. I'm your host, Nate Kelly, a recovering alcoholic, 7 years from my last drink, a recovery mentor, and podcast producer. I am so grateful to be bringing you these powerful stories of recovery told by you, those who live them. Please share this podcast with anyone who may need it today. And with that, let's open the diary on episode 91. I am here with my new friend, Heidi Bachtel. Heidi, happy Sunday. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, I'm excited to get to know more about you and see, what parallels we may have in our story and just have a quick chat. Everything's very conversational, so I'd love to get to know more about you. Let's start with your sobriety date. How long have you been sober?
Yeah, so I have been sober since winter of 2019. I'm not sure of the exact date because I was kind of having a mental health event when it all kind of kicked off. I turned 30 December 1st on 2019. So it was somewhere around there was when I'd finally gotten sober. It's been a while, a pretty good amount of time.
Yeah.
Thankfully, no relapses. My addiction was Percocet and Xanax. Also, since then, I don't drink at all also, just because I don't even want to risk the potential for me to get into some other type of addiction.
Smart.
Yeah.
It definitely is fueled, in my opinion, by the same emotions and sort of dependence, and sounds as though it's tied pretty tightly to your mental health. And my recovery is the same. So I can relate to that. I think it's important to understand where we came from. So let's jump into your story. I think, start where you want to start and wherever makes sense to bring the listener along on a journey. But I'd love to get to know more about Heidi.
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably start with my childhood. So I grew up with a mom who had borderline personality disorder, and I want to be very careful and not demonizing anyone who has that disorder because I know some people who have it who are really great, amazing people.
Yeah.
I think my mom, she didn't want to go to therapy. So I think she just never learned how to handle her emotions. And unfortunately, she kind of took that out on me and my brothers. So it was very much like walking around on eggshells growing up. I just kind of grew up into this very anxious child. In high school, just never feeling like confident in myself because my mom, I think she was just unhappy with her life. So she kind of took it out on us, with like just name calling and things like that. So, just growing up hearing that you're worthless and you're dumb and all these things, like can't gain any confidence. My very, very first drug experience was pretty young, like middle school. Like I smoked weed for the first time. I kind of embarrassing. It's so cringy, but my mom would drink like Zimas and I would bring them to school with me.
Wow.
And I thought I was so cool. It's like so cringy now. For me, that was like, I was like, oh, I can just feel good by drinking a substance or taking a pill. And I just didn't really know how else to feel good kind of growing up. When I was 18, my mom and I, we stopped talking. We went no contact for about 12 years. And I just kind of needed to heal. Also, I think she finally went to therapy from that. That was kind of a big wake up call for her. One brother didn't talk to her for 8 years. Another one didn't talk to her for another amount of time. And I have two older brothers. All three of us have had drug problems. One of them was homeless for a while. He's better. He has a job and he's functioning, doing a lot better. My one oldest brother, unfortunately, he just doesn't seem to have been able to recover. He went to detox last week, but they weren't able to accept him into rehab because in Seattle, there's this drug going around called Tranq, which people are using with fentanyl. When you use it, you get these sores on your body. Sorry if this is too graphic.
No,
but,
I'm interested.
So I'm learning a lot about why our drug problem is so bad in Seattle because he has these sores. He can't go into rehab. They don't want anyone with open sores in rehab.
Right.
And it's like, well, everybody has these because they're using fentanyl and Tranq. It's a horse tranquilizer that they mix with fentanyl now. Your blood can't circulate to certain parts of your body. So then you just start having skin necrosis in certain parts. So as a family, we're trying to get my brother, he now he's at a point where he wants to go, but now we can't even get him in because they're like, oh, he has all these wounds and stuff. So it's like we're just desperately trying to keep him sober until he can get in. So my whole family's had substance use, and I'm better, my one brother's better, but we have this one that we're both trying to be like, all right.
Yeah.
So then kind of growing up in early 20s, I was just always just anxious, always had some slight depression, just never felt confident, never really felt happy. I would, go to parties and stuff, and I tried some drugs here and there, but the ones that I really liked was Xanax and Percocet was like the downers. And I feel like those took away my anxiety. I just being so self-conscious and everything. Like I was like, oh, this is like a magic pill. I can kind of be who I want to be. I can really be Heidi. Sometimes I would mix that with drinking and then I wouldn't remember what I did. The next day people would be like, oh, Heidi, like, do you remember this? And I'd be like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I was so dumb. Like early 20s, I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But now as an adult, I'm like, oh, that's so cringy. That's
The
so
worst.
scary.
Mm-hmm.
Things kind of took a bad turn when I was 24. I was dating this guy and I was like just super in love with him. And we went through a breakup. And I was just kind of at this point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to go and do like all these things that I want to do. So I got a nose job. I went to Southeast Asia and backpacked around. I went to Australia. Fortunately for my surgery, the guy, he kind of botched it. And so I was having this chronic pain and he did a lot more than I had wanted to. So this weird thing happened where I couldn't recognize like my own face, if that makes sense. So it put me into this weird depression spiral. So I was on this backpacking trip and I was like, okay, I'm trying to like do this trip that I've always wanted to do. Then it just went completely downhill. And then when I was in Australia, I was like sexually assaulted. That just kind of added on top of it. And then I came home. I should mention, while I was in my downward spiral, I was in Southeast Asia where you can buy drugs over the counter really easy. Like you can buy Xanax, diazepam, anything you want. So I was just having this free for all on the beach, partying.
Wow.
So I was probably like on Xanax every day, taking multiple pills for like 6 months. Like that's how long I was backpacking for.
Damn, that's a trip.
Yeah, I know, right? I feel bad kind of being like a part of it was fun, but then
Yeah.
like obviously the coming down was horrible.
Right.
And I didn't know that you can't go off of benzos cold turkey. I didn't know that. After I was sexually assaulted, I basically flew home and I was staying with my friend Kevin and he had a heroin addiction. So basically I was living with him and I was like going to therapy and basically the trauma had triggered a mental illness in me, like a mental break. So I developed OCD. So I was kind of reliving the trauma over and over again. So I was with Kevin. I was trying my hardest to come off of all these drugs and get better and not like commit suicide basically. And then he was trying to get clean off of heroin. So we were kind of like each other's partners. Like we were like
Support.
yeah. And then he decided to go to a detox facility in Costa Rica where they did Ibogaine. And unfortunately, when he was down there, he overdosed and he passed away. And for me, that was like so traumatic because I was like starting to get better. From then to about 5 years, I was basically just using Percocet and Xanax, wasn't able to get clean. I think at that point, I was just kind of had this like fuck life. I just kind of felt like I just wanted to numb and not feel anything. So basically, 2019 came around, and this was when I decided to actually finally get sober. I had come across some counterfeit pills. Usually I would go to this lady that I would buy pills from and she got them from the pharmacy, but she had ran out. So I found someone else that where I could get some Percocet from and they didn't look the same. They looked different. I went on like one of those pill ID websites and I was like, this isn't
Yeah.
Percocet. But, I'd promised myself, I was like, okay, you're only going to take prescription, don't do anything risky. But then the addict in me came out and was like, oh, how bad can this be? So I only took like 1/4 of the pill and I would take pills all the time. So it was when I was happy or when I was sad or when I just wanted to go run errands, just anytime I could,
Yeah.
really. So I had taken this 1/4 of a pill and I had gone out to run some errands and I was vacuuming out my car and I just was like, I feel really different. This doesn't feel like the normal stuff. And it's interesting with opiates because like when you take a certain amount, you get that euphoria feeling, but then when you kind of take too much, it almost starts to feel painful. It's really weird. So I started kind of feeling this pain, and I was like, it wasn't feeling good. And I was like, oh shit. Like I stayed conscious. I didn't like pass out or anything, but that was like a big wake up call for me. I was like, Heidi, what would have happened if you'd taken that whole pill? Like,
Oof.
what if,
Yeah.
that could have been, yeah, because you hear about that all the time. And I had heard about that where people were taking pills and they would just not wake up after. And, my whole thing was like, oh, well, I'm taking prescription, so I'm safe.
Yeah.
But it's just, I really scared myself because I was like, how do you just, it was a big wake up call because I was like, how do you just risk your life to get high?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? Like, what would have happened if you hadn't have woken up? And my mind just went to my family hearing the news, maybe being on the news of like another overdose, like Seattle woman, 29 found in an apartment, or, like just stuff like that. I was like, I don't want that to be my story. It was kind of like the big wake up call that I needed. So from then I started to get sober. But then what happened is kind of back to when I had that trauma and I had that mental break and I had the OCD kind of come up, all of that came back. So I was getting sober, but then my OCD came back. And it's kind of hard to describe OCD, but it basically feels like you kind of lose control of your mind and your thoughts. For people who don't know what OCD is, you have like an obsession, and then you have a distress, and then you do like a ritual or something to make it better. And then you get this temporary relief. So it just kind of is like this circle.
So for
Like,
like, if you would see a stereotypical person with
mhm,
OCD tapping something, what is it called?
obsession.
Yeah.
That would be their compulsion. Sorry. So usually it starts with like an internal thought. So someone with like light switch, they would be like, if I don't switch the light switch 5 times, my family will die. What's weird with OCD is like there's a part of you that's cognizant where you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing is crazy and it doesn't make sense, but the urge is so intense to like not give in. So with me, I didn't have physical compulsions, but I had mental. So that would come into my head where it would be like, you're a bad person. Like most people will have thoughts like that, but then they can just kind of dismiss them. But for me, I would have like a panic attack, or like with OCD, you can have really intrusive thoughts where like you'll be talking to someone and it'll be like, what if you just like punch them in the face?
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, you're like, why did I have that thought? What's wrong with me? Am I a violent person? And then for me, my compulsion would be to go through and be like, well, no, I'm not a bad person because of this, this, this.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the OCD cycle.
Got it.
Yeah, and OCD, it's like an ego dystonic disorder. So it will attack the opposite of what you are. It's so weird because it knows what you value and share so much. So like for me, I never want to hurt people because my mom was so hurtful. So I never wanted to be like her. It knows exactly what to attack in a strange way. I've basically been in therapy since I was 18, just because when I was 18, I finally left my mom's. I was
Yeah.
just so like broken in so many ways. One of the things that just helped me understand her and understand myself more too was just like self-help books. Like I just became obsessed with like reading and learning and all these things. And that just kind of really helped me kind of heal myself and understand my mom more. And in understanding her, it helped heal me. It's been a whole whirlwind.
Yeah. After that incident with the pill and you
hmm
decided to start on this path of recovery, was it willpower and one day at a time in the beginning, or
hmm
did you seek any 12-step recovery or support group?
Yeah, so I went to a community mental health place in Seattle. It was called Sound Mental Health, and the people there were so amazing and they were so kind. I actually didn't know that I had OCD at that time. So earlier, the doctors, they didn't diagnose me with OCD. I think there was just so much that had happened. They were like, oh yeah, of course this girl is having anxiety, like this rat's nest of trauma, and they were like just trying to be like, I don't know what to do with her.
Yeah, I'm
um,
grateful that they took the time to dive in and figure things out for
mhm.
you.
Yeah, so basically, I went to this mental health facility, and the doctor there, I talked to him because I thought I had schizophrenia. I was like, all these things are happening to me. Like, my brain is out of control and having these thoughts that I can't control. And I seriously thought like my life was over, and I was contemplating suicide again. And that was like, okay, I need help. And so I went there, and they diagnosed with OCD. There's certain therapies for OCD that you do. One of them is called ERP, which is exposure response prevention therapy. So they got me on the right medication. I started doing that therapy, and
Is that like physically exposing to your fears or things that
Hmm.
remind you of your trauma, like
Yeah.
exposure?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically, it's kind of similar to like when people have certain phobias. So with OCD, you know how you'll get a thought and you'll be like, oh no, I would never do that. The way to combat it is to be like, well, I might, you know, you just kind of have to have this acceptance.
Like,
And
what would happen if I did?
yeah, so you kind of have to be like, well, what if I did? And then basically you kind of go through this like anxiety. And then after the anxiety subsides and you're like, okay, I'm fine. Because you basically have to stop yourself from doing the compulsion that gives you relief. So for me, it would be checking. So like when I thought I had schizophrenia before I went to the doctor, like this is so OCD, but I would get this thought of like, what if you have schizophrenia? And then I'd be like, well, oh my God, do I? And then I'd go to the computer and I'd Google all the symptoms. I'd be like, well, I don't have that. I don't have that. So then I'd have that temporary relief. That's why I kind of said I don't really remember getting clean or going through the
Mm,
withdrawals because I
yeah.
was just so mentally like just out of it, just trying to
Exhausted.
fight through these intrusive thoughts. Very exhausted because that's one thing I hear people talking about, like with opiates. They're like, "Oh, the withdrawals were so horrible," and I'm like, I don't remember them at all, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. In my experience, things
Hmm.
definitely got worse before they got better because it's this roller coaster of
Hmm.
emotions, right? With the withdrawals and the
Yeah.
sort of questioning life and questioning everything. Do you remember when you first started to feel that first little bit of gratitude and what it was regarding?
I remember the first thing. For me, it was just being able to kind of leave my house again and not having to have pills on me.
Mm,
Because for me, it was always like the safety blanket of the
yeah.
Xanax and stuff. Because I had a really hard time leaving the house, just with my anxiety and everything. Going to the grocery store, driving, just all these things were like just so overwhelming. And then I remember just kind of finally being able to just go out. I was like, okay, I don't need this stuff. Like I can do this. I can face life and I don't have to be a slave to these drugs. I had been afraid to travel for a long time, flying anywhere because then I was like, what if I get caught with my drugs,
Yeah.
And it's for me that was a big thing too. It was kind of this freeing feeling where I was like, oh, I could actually go somewhere now. I could fly somewhere and I don't need these drugs. So that was like a big weight being lifted off too. It's how the
Such a weight.
chains coming off.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I know you're pretty active on Instagram now and you're doing things like
Mhm.
this and sharing your story and being public about your recovery. What was the
Mhm.
catalyst to start to recover out loud?
Okay, so I got clean about 2019, and then I feel like I didn't really start sharing a lot until like 2022. Well, for me, first I kind of started doing like fitness stuff and working out, and that just kind of really helped me feel better. And it was kind of the way I combated my like anxiety and depression. So first I just kind of started showing like fitness stuff, and then like my weight loss and everything like that. Because I had that transfer addiction where I, put down the pills and I picked up the food. So I started eating a
Yes.
lot. And then I was like, okay, Heidi, this is also not a good addiction. So
No.
we're going to go to the gym. Yeah. Then it was like around 2022 that I kind of started sharing that I had had an addiction problem, all these things, and just kind of sharing that. And I was really scared at first because I was a very like functional addict. Like I was still going to work. Like no one ever suspected that I had a problem, which to me is like kind of crazy now looking back. Cause I'm like, I was pretty loopy at some of those
Yeah.
parties. And
Yeah.
maybe they just thought I was drunk or something.
Right.
For me, the scariest part was like telling my dad. I was like, because I wanted to tell him before I posted anything because I didn't want him to find out through social media. So yeah, so I just kind of started sharing, and then all the feedback that I got was really loving and really supportive. And then people started messaging me too and being like, "Hey, like I went through the same thing," or they're like, "Hey, I'm kind of dealing with this right now. Like, what advice do you have?" And that just kind of gave me this like sense of relief because then I just that shame started to leave me. Like, I had that shame for a really long time. So being able to just kind of share that and then to start helping other people was so rewarding. It just kind of felt like it gave me a purpose and that I could take all of this pain and trauma that I went through and actually kind of use it towards something positive. So for me, that just really helps the whole experience. I didn't feel like resentful at all towards what I went through. I was like, okay, I can be powerful with it. I can share it and I can use it for good.
So, have you been able to sort of understand your mom's situation and sort of where she was coming from? And because I look at my situation and wondering that if I were a parent when I was at my lowest, how I would have been able to cope or what my child's experience would have been like. Is there any sort of, I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but understanding on your mom's part to sort of see the situation she
Yeah.
was in?
No, I definitely have a lot of understanding and empathy just because the more I read about borderline personality disorder and stuff, it's just from what I've read from people who have it, they talk about, they said sometimes it just feels like their brain is on fire. Like they feel things so much more than we do. I definitely feel a lot of empathy towards her and I don't blame her because it's like she has this thing and she didn't ask for it. I know that she loved me and she did the best she could. And we are on talking terms now. And when we met again, I didn't know what it was going to be like. I was really kind of scared.
I can
So,
imagine.
but
My
it
heart's
was,
beating just hearing you like
yeah, because
tell the story.
I feel like if I say this, it'll sound bad, but she was kind of like the boogeyman a little bit to me because I was
Sure.
so afraid of her. I was terrified of her. So it was weird when I was driving to go see her again for the first time. I was like shaking and I was like, my boyfriend was driving me and I was like, I remember just having these thoughts like, I don't know if I can do this. We should turn around, like, because I was so scared
Yeah.
still. But then when I finally saw her and I just saw her, I was like, she's this 50 something year old lady. Like, she can't hurt me. And she did, in a way, say that she regretted a lot of things. We didn't talk about it a long time, but she never, like, outright said sorry. But she was like, I wish I would have done some things differently. And, she was like, I was just really angry during those times and I didn't know how to control my anger. And her just kind of admitting that was very therapeutic for me. And because if she was like, "Oh, I did nothing wrong," then
Right.
it would have been a little bit harder to kind of still
Definitely.
talk. But yeah, so we've been trying to work on our relationship again, and it's been healing for sure. She did go to therapy, so she's a lot better with it. She doesn't have these extreme like emotional outbursts a lot. We're doing better, so that's been good because that was a big hole missing in my life. Just growing up, being like I not really having a mom or a mother figure, it was really hard.
I'm glad to hear that.
hmm
So, what's on your vision board? What's next for Heidi?
So for me, I'm doing the fitness training, and I've got some people that I'm training right now, and just working with them has been so rewarding. My long term goal would be to do that full time. I would also like to be a sobriety coach so I can help people who've gone through the stuff that I went through. I never went through a 12-step program. I just kind of had worked one on one with a counselor, but I want to become more knowledgeable about that and just other ways I can help people. Like my goal is to have like a fitness slash sobriety program. So if someone's like,
Yeah.
hey, I just got sober, or if I'm struggling right now, I can kind of help guide them through that journey. And to me, that just kind of feels like it gives my life purpose. Like I have some clients right now where, they were kind of in a similar place where I was, and just seeing them thrive, it just makes me so happy. It's just like the best feeling in the world to be able to do that and contribute and just kind of being someone's coach. And because I didn't really have someone when I was going through that. It's really cool to be there for someone to be like, hey, like you're feeling this way, just stick it out, or like you might end up feeling like this, or you can kind of help them with what might be coming up next or things like that.
Health and fitness and recovery or sobriety, they go so hand in hand.
hmm
The fitness side of things is so important. And especially if you're new to recovery and it keeps you busy and it keeps your mind off of things. And it's rewarding if you see results in
hmm
your weight or your fitness or whatnot. So I think that's a great plan.
hmm
So, Heidi, as you know, I like to leave the
Right.
listeners with some takeaways or tangible things. So, I want to tie this one sort of with family, since we've discussed addiction being a family disease, in particular with your siblings. So someone's listening and they have a loved one who's struggling. What can someone do from a family or a loved one's perspective, perhaps to offer assistance or to help their loved one make it out of their hell?
I would say to just give them love and support. But the thing with my brother, him, it was a little difficult because he would ask for money a lot, and we'd be like, okay, if we give you money, we know it's going to go to fentanyl. So
Right.
what we did is because what happened is like his dad was giving him money and then he would stop, and then my mom would give him money and she would stop, and he would just kind of go back and forth. So as a family, we all kind of got together as a group, and we had like a game plan of like, nobody give him money until he goes to rehab. And he was at the point where he kind of needed that. So I would say you need a combination of love and support, but then I don't know if tough love is the right word, but you kind of need to be like, hey, we're not going to keep giving you money. Like, we're not going to keep helping you like destroy your life. Like at some point you're going to need to start helping yourself. And when we did that, then within a few weeks, he was like, okay, I'm ready to go to rehab. So yeah, with my brother, it's been hard to kind of see him on drugs and the person he's become, but I just have this hope that the brother that I grew up with is still in there. I know that it'll be a long journey of recovery for him, but I'm not giving up, but I'm still having those boundaries with him. So I would say just love, support, and boundaries.
Heidi, you're a beautiful soul inside and out. I'm so grateful that we had this time together today. I'll link everything in today's show notes, but where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram. My Instagram handle is Heidi, HEIDI _ my last name, Bechtel Fit. My last name is BACHTEL, and then Fit, FIT. You can reach out to me there. I'm an open book. If anybody has any questions about family or really anything, I'm available to help. And it makes me really happy to help. So don't feel like you're bothering me.
Heidi, thank you so much. Let's keep in touch, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today, friend. Hopefully you heard something that resonates with you. And if we help just one person, our job is done. Make sure you check today's show notes for all the information discussed in today's episode and how to connect with our guests. Until next Wednesday, try your best not to drink and be good to yourself. Bye, everyone.